The laughter started before Rael even reached the door. He heard it from down the corridor, low, clicking sounds from the Vorkai, the wet gurgle that passed for amusement among the Thervani, and the dry hiss of the two Drakveth observers who had come to watch. He did not know what the joke was yet. He would figure it out soon enough. The message on his comm unit had been simple: report to Medical Bay 9, lower dock ring, immediate priority. Rael had been eating a cold bowl of grain paste when it came through. He left the paste, pulled on his kit bag, and walked. That was the job. Message comes, you walk. Bay 9 was the worst bay on the station. Everyone knew it. It sat at the edge of the lower ring where the cargo haulers docked, and it smelled of fuel compound and rust and whatever species had last bled in it. The equipment was old. The lighting flickered at the far end. It was the bay they used when something needed to look like an effort was being made without anyone actually making one. Rael pushed the door open. The first thing he noticed was the size of her. She filled nearly a third of the bay. The Drakveth female was sprawled across the floor on her side, which told him immediately that she could not hold herself upright. Her scales were dark, a deep, bruised blue-black, where they should have been the color of old copper. Her breathing came in long, ragged pulls, each one visibly costing her. 3 of the station's senior medical staff stood near the far wall, data slates in hand, speaking quietly among themselves. None of them were near her. Commander Breath stood to one side. He was Vorkai tall, segmented, with the flat compound eyes that always made it hard to tell where he was actually looking. He was looking at Rael, and he was making the clicking sound. Medic Duras, Breath said. Thank you for coming. We have a patient in need of care. The clicking continued, quieter now, like something suppressed. She is all yours. One of the Thervani, Yisin, the station's senior physician, handed Rael a data slate without making eye contact. Toxin compound, likely engineered. Drakveth specific. Lymphatic cascade failure beginning in the secondary channel system. 3 of the core filtration clusters are in early collapse. He paused. We have done what can be done. Resource allocation protocol has been invoked. Rael looked at the slate. He looked at the patient. He looked back at the slate. 6 hours, Isin added. Perhaps less. I am sorry, medic. He did not sound sorry. He sounded like a man who had already moved on to his next task and was simply being polite about the transition. Breath was still making the clicking sound. The Drakveth observers whispered to each other in their own tongue. Rael set the data slate down on the nearest surface. He opened his kit bag. He pulled on his examination gloves. I will need the full compound analysis, he said. Everything your team ran. Send it to my unit. Isin blinked his wide amber eyes. We have already concluded. Send it, Rael said. Not loudly, just flatly. There was a pause. Isin sent it. Rael walked toward the patient. She was conscious. Barely. One enormous eye tracked him as he approached a pale, fractured gold, the pupil blown wide with pain and chemical stress. Up close, the scale discoloration was worse. There were ruptures along her flank where internal pressure had built and burst, and the tissue beneath was dark with contamination. The smell was sharp and chemical and wrong. She moved her head. It took obvious effort. When she spoke, her voice was deep and broken and carried the grinding weight of someone working through enormous pain to produce words in a language that was not her own. Do not, she said, waste your effort, little mammal. Rael crouched down to her eye level. He looked at her steadily for a moment. I have not decided it is wasted yet, he said. She stared at him. He stood up and began his assessment. Behind him, the laughter had stopped. He did not notice, because he had already stopped thinking about them. The data from Isin's team was thorough, at least. Rael read it as he moved around her, cross-referencing it with the xenobiology files he had on his personal unit. The toxin was sophisticated. It was not a blunt instrument. It had been built to target the Drakveth lymphatic equivalent with precision, disrupting the filtration cascade in a sequence that would eventually make every major organ equivalent in her body unsustainable. Isin's conclusion was not unreasonable. On paper, the math was bad. Rael had a complicated relationship with paper math. He checked her core temperature elevated, which meant her metabolism was still fighting. That was something. He checked her fluid levels, her respiratory function, the electrical patterns running through her nervous system at the base of her skull. He noted the points where the toxin's damage was heaviest and the points where her own biology was still holding a line. She watched him the whole time. The golden eye followed every movement. "You are not afraid of me," she said, during a pause. It was not quite a question. "Should I be?" he asked. A long silence. "Most are. You cannot currently lift your head," he said. "I think we are fine." Something shifted in her expression. He was not fluent enough in Drakveth facial anatomy to read it precisely. He filed it away and kept working. The staff had gone quiet behind him. He could feel them watching. He did not turn around. There was no point. Either they would help when he asked, or they would not, and he would find out which when the time came. He finished his initial assessment. He straightened up. He stood still for a moment, looking at nothing in particular, running the problem through his head the way he always did, not looking for the elegant solution, but for the possible one. There was something. It was not clean. It was not what any instructor at any academy would have approved. But it was there. He pulled his comm unit and started making calls. The first one was to Isin. Isin answered with the expression of someone who had expected to be left alone. "I need everything you have on Drakveth metabolic cycling rates," Rail said. "And I need to know what you have in the synthesis lab that can push a forced metabolic flush." Isin stared at him through the comm screen. That would place enormous caloric strain on a system already under. "I know what it would do," Rail said. "What do you have?" Another pause. Isin began to list compounds. Rail wrote them down. In the background, Commander Breath had stopped clicking. He stood very still, watching Rail work, and for the first time since the door had opened, he did not look like a man who had just told a joke. He looked like a man who was beginning to wonder if the joke had been on him. Behind Rail, the patient breathed. In, out, in, still here. He intended to keep her that way. The synthesis lab was 3 levels up and not designed for emergencies. Rail knew this because the door required a manual access code. One of the storage units was locked behind a requisition form that needed 2 senior signatures, and the ceiling light in the back corner had been broken for what looked like several months. He bypassed the access code with his medical override, flagged the requisition form as an active critical case, and signed it himself both times using different initials, and worked by the light of his handheld lamp in the back corner. Nobody stopped him. Nobody helped him either. That was fine. He was used to working in the space between those two things. He had 4 compounds from Isin's list that were viable starting points. What he needed to build was a forced metabolic accelerant, something that would push the Drakveth lymphatic system into a rapid cycling state, burning through the toxins cascade faster than the cascade could complete itself. The risk was significant. A forced flush at this scale would consume enormous energy reserves. If Sara's body did not have enough left to sustain the process, the treatment would kill her faster than the toxin. But the toxin was already winning. The math on doing nothing was worse than the math on trying. He worked through the compound combinations carefully, checking each one against the Drakveth biochemistry files he had pulled. 3 of the 4 compounds were usable. The 4th was reactive in a way that would have caused secondary hemorrhaging along her respiratory tract, which was the last thing she needed. He set it aside. The remaining 3 were not enough on their own. He needed a delivery medium, something that would carry the accelerant into her lymphatic channels without triggering an immune rejection response. Drakveth immune systems were aggressive. Their bodies treated foreign compounds the way a fire treated dry wood. He stood in the back corner of the lab for a while, staring at the shelves. Then he went to the station commissary. The commissary worker, a young Thervani, named something that translated roughly as soft water, stared at him when he came in. "I need your densest caloric stock," Rail said. "For a Drakveth. What do you carry?" Soft water blinked. "We have compressed nutrient blocks for Drakveth traders. They are very..." "All of them," Rail said. "However many you have." He left the commissary with a crate of compressed nutrient blocks, a container of high-density mineral solution intended for large-body species, and a package of something that the label described as Drakveth travel ration paste, which smelled extraordinary in a way that Rail chose not to think about. He carried the crate back to the synthesis lab and began breaking the blocks down into their base components. The logic was simple enough once he had it. The accelerant needed a carrier. The carrier needed to be something Sara's body would recognize as food rather than medicine. If he suspended the accelerant inside a dense nutritive medium that her lymphatic system was already designed to process, he could use her own biology's hunger response to pull the compound through. Her body would take the nutrition. The accelerant would come with it. It was not elegant. It was not in any manual. But it followed the rules of how the system worked, and that was all he needed. He spent 90 minutes building the solution. He checked it 3 times. Then he carried it back down to Bay 9. Sarah was in worse condition than when he had left. Her breathing had grown shallower. The scale discoloration had spread further along her neck. The golden eye tracked him when he entered, but more slowly than before. "You returned," she said. "I said I would." He set the solution down and began preparing the delivery line. Drakveth physiology had a lymphatic access point along the underside of the jaw, a soft channel between 2 scale plates where the system was closest to the surface. It was the same point that Drakveth healers used for traditional compound delivery. According to the 3rd volume of xenobiology references, he had read it too in the morning on a sleepless night 4 months ago. He had not known why he read it then. He knew now. "What is that?" she said. Not a question, more like something she was saying out loud to herself. "Nutritive solution with a metabolic accelerant," he said. "It is going to push your lymphatic system to cycle faster. It will hurt. Your body is going to burn through its reserves quickly. You will need to eat a significant amount afterward, assuming this works." A pause. "Assuming." "Yes." Another pause. "You are honest." "It saves time," he said. He administered the solution. The delivery took 11 minutes. For the first 3, nothing visibly happened. Then Sarah went rigid. Every scale on her body seemed to tighten at once. A sound came out of her that was not a word, low and grinding and enormous, and the monitoring equipment rail had rigged from 3 separate portable units, all spiked at the same moment. He watched the readouts. He did not touch anything. There was nothing to touch. The process was running, and either it would work or it would not, and his job right now was to watch and know which one was happening in time to respond. The spike held for 40 seconds. Then it began to drop. Then it dropped further. Then the readings leveled. Not where they had been before. Better. Not good, not safe. Not stable. Not anything close to recovered, but measurably, undeniably better. The cascade disruption in her lymphatic channels was slowing. The toxin was still present, but its progression had stalled. Her metabolism was cycling hard, burning through the chemical interference faster than the compound could rebuild itself. Rael let out a breath he had not been aware of holding. He sat down on the floor next to her. Not because his legs were giving out, though they were, somewhat, but because sitting put him at her eye level, and he wanted to see her face. Her eye was open. The pupil was still blown wide, but the color was marginally clearer. She was looking at him. "Still here," he said. She did not answer immediately. When she did, her voice was a little stronger than before. "Not much. Enough." "What is your name?" she said. "Rael." She considered this. "Rael?" she repeated, as if she were measuring the weight of it. "I have lived 340 years. I have had healers. I have had physicians. I have had specialists whose titles took longer to say than their treatments lasted." She paused. "None of them built medicine out of commissary rations. Most of them probably had better equipment," he said. "Most of them," she said slowly, "had already decided what was possible before they walked through the door." He did not answer that. He checked her temperature instead. Still elevated, but the rise had stopped. He had bought her time. How much, he did not know yet. Her secondary systems, the organ clusters that Isin had flagged as beginning to fail, were still failing. The metabolic flush had slowed the toxin, but it had not repaired the damage already done. That was the next problem. There was always a next problem. That was the nature of the work. He pulled up his contact list and started looking for anyone in the cooperative network who knew Drakveth internal medicine in real depth. Not the general files. Not the public databases. An actual person who had actually treated them. He found one. A retired Drakveth physician living on a colony world, listed in an old conference archive as having published on internal organ recovery techniques. The listing was 9 years old. The contact address might not work. He sent a message anyway. Then he settled in to wait, watching the monitors, watching her breathing slowly steady. Outside the bay, the station carried on. Cargo moved. Species traded. The cooperative hummed along in its vast, bureaucratic way. Nobody came to check on them. That was fine. He did not need them to check. He needed the monitors to keep showing improvement, and he needed the retired Drakveth doctor to answer his message, and he needed Sarah to keep breathing. 2 out of 3 were happening right now. He was working on the 3rd. Somewhere between the 14th and 15th hour, the station started paying attention. It did not happen all at once. It never does. It began with a young Thervani aide named something that translated to Quick Current, who had been sent to Bay 9 to collect a portable monitoring unit that was listed in the inventory as unassigned. Quick Current had expected to walk into an empty room or, at most, a room with a body in it. Instead, she pressed her face against the viewport in the door and saw the human crouched beside the Drakveth, checking a readout panel he had assembled from 3 separate pieces of equipment that did not belong together, speaking quietly to the patient as he worked. Quick Current stood at the viewport for almost a full minute before she remembered herself. She did not collect the monitoring unit. She went back to her station and told the 2 colleagues nearest to her what she had seen. By the end of the hour, the information had moved through 6 different species across 2 levels of the station, acquiring details and distortions as it went. The version that reached Commander Breath was, the human is still in there. She is still alive. Breath received this information while reviewing a cargo manifest, which he set down very carefully. He sent a junior officer. The officer's name was Gret, and Gret was young enough to be nervous about the assignment, but professional enough not to show it. Gret knocked on the bay door with the regulation 3-tap pattern for non-emergency entry. The door opened. The human looked out at him. "Sir," Gret said, "Commander Breath asked me to check on the... I need a portable thermal regulator, 2 rolls of adhesive seal tape rated for high-temperature surfaces, and whatever food stock the commissary has left that is compatible with Drakveth biology." Rail looked at him steadily. "When you have those things, knock again." He closed the door. Gret stood in the corridor for a moment. He cummed Commander Breath. He relayed the list. Breath was quiet for long enough that Gret checked to make sure the connection was still open. "Get him what he asked for," Breath said finally. Gret got him what he asked for. Inside the bay, things had shifted in the hours since the metabolic flush. The toxins cascade had slowed significantly. Sara's filtration system had stabilized at a reduced capacity, not good, but not collapsing. The immediate crisis had moved from "she will die in 6 hours" to "she is in serious danger and needs sustained intervention," which was, in Rail's personal scale of outcomes, a meaningful improvement. The secondary problem had not waited for him to be ready. 2 of Sara's internal organ clusters, the structures that managed waste filtration and secondary nutrient processing, were deteriorating. This was damage from the toxin's early cascade, before the flush had slowed it. The toxin had done what it was designed to do in those first hours, and now her body was dealing with the aftermath. His message to the retired Drakveth physician had been answered. The response had come 6 hours in, a brief and somewhat irritable reply asking who Rail was and why he was contacting a retired practitioner at this hour with questions about organ cluster recovery. Rail had replied with a 2-sentence summary of the situation. The next response had come in 12 minutes, a calm request, audio and visual, urgent priority. The physician's name was Veth. He was old. Rail could see it in the way he held himself, the particular stillness that came with centuries rather than decades. His scales were faded to a pale gray copper, and his eyes were sharper than anything else about him. "Show me her readings," Veth said, without introduction. Rail showed him. Veth was quiet for a moment that lasted long enough to be uncomfortable. "The cluster deterioration," he said. "How far advanced?" 30% function on the primary cluster, 52% on the secondary. "And you do not have a regeneration suite." "I do not have a regeneration suite." Another silence. "What do you have?" Rail listed what he had. Veth listened. Then Veth told him about a procedure developed before regeneration technology had made it largely obsolete, used in field conditions on colony worlds where proper facilities were not available. It involved a combination of direct pressure intervention on the cluster tissue and a timed chemical stimulus that could coax damaged cells into a partial recovery state. The survival rate in proper facilities was around 40%. In the field, with improvised materials, Veth did not give him a number. He described the steps instead, which Rail understood to be a deliberate choice. They talked for 2 hours. Rail asked questions. Veth answered them. Toward the end, Veth asked him where he had trained. Rail told him. Veth made a sound that, on a Drakveth face, Rail was fairly sure was surprise. "A generalist program," Veth said. "Not a xenobiology specialist." "No. But you read the reference volumes." "I read everything," Rail said. "I never know what will be useful." Veth was quiet for a moment. She is someone important, he said. Not a question. She is a patient, Rail said. Veth made the sound again. Do the procedure, Rail. I will stay on the line. He did the procedure. It took 40 minutes. Sarah was conscious for all of it. She did not make a sound for most of it, which told Rail more about how much pain she was in than any sound would have. At minute 32, her body's response moved in the wrong direction and Rail had to make 2 fast adjustments based on Veth talking in his ear, moving from the planned steps to something improvised and then back again. At minute 40, he stepped back. At minute 43, the cluster readings began to change. Not recovered, not even close, but moving in the right direction for the first time since Rail had walked through the door. The tissue was responding. Slowly, partially, but responding. Veth made a long, slow sound that Rail did not have a translation for. Well, Veth said. Well. Rail thanked him. Veth said he wanted a full report when the situation resolved, whichever way it resolved. Rail said he would send one. Veth closed the connection. In the bay, the monitors beeped steadily. Rail checked each one. Then he looked at Sarah. Her eye was open, fully open, for the first time since he had come in. The gold was clearer. Still not right, still strained, and pain narrowed but present. Focused. Looking at him with something that he could not read precisely but that felt, in some basic way, like recognition. It is working, he said. Plainly. I can feel it, she said. Her voice was still rough, but it carried better now. The words did not cost her the same way they had 12 hours ago. It feels strange. The cells are relearning what to do, he said. Your body is not used to being assisted this way. It will feel strange for a while. She considered this. You talked to Veth. He looked at her. You know him? He was my family's physician, she said, when I was young. A pause. That was a long time ago. Rail absorbed that. He filed it away. He sat down on the floor. The door to the bay opened and Gret appeared, carrying the supplies Rail had requested. Gret stepped inside, looked at the dragon who was visibly more alive than the reports had suggested she would be, looked at Rail sitting on the floor, and set the supplies down with great care. Is there anything else the commander can provide? Gret asked. Not right now, Rail said. Tell him she is stable. Gret nodded. He looked at Sarah once more, not with fear, exactly, but with the particular expression of someone revising their expectations in real time, and left. The door closed. Your commander sent someone to check, Sarah said. Yes. He expected you to have failed. Probably. She was quiet for a moment. Does that bother you? Rail thought about it honestly. No, he said. What they expect does not change what is in front of me. She looked at him. The gold of her eye caught the dim light of the bay and held it. No, she said, slowly, as if she were arriving at something. I do not think it does. Outside, the station had stopped laughing. It was watching now, quietly, through viewports and corridor whispers and second-hand reports, waiting to see what the human would do next. Rail was not thinking about them. He was reading her temperature chart, comparing it to the readings from 4 hours ago, and planning the next 12 hours of care with the focused attention of someone who had one job and had not finished it yet. She was still here. So was he. That was enough for now. On the second day, Sarah started talking. Not because she was delirious, she had passed through that window and out the other side sometime in the early hours, when the metabolic flush had done its hardest work and left her clear-headed and exhausted. She talked because she had been still and quiet for a very long time, and stillness, it turned out, had a limit even for a 340-year-old dragon. Rail had not slept. He had come close, twice, in the low hours when the monitors were steady and there was nothing immediate to do. Both times something had shifted in the readings, nothing critical, just the small fluctuations of a body working hard to recover, and he had been awake again before he fully went under. He had stopped fighting it. There was a rhythm to staying awake past a certain point where the tiredness became a kind of background noise rather than an urgent pressure, and he had found that rhythm sometime around hour 30. He was reviewing her inflammation markers when she spoke. They were waiting for me, she said. He looked up. Who? Whoever set the ambush. She did not move. Movement still cost her more than she wanted to spend, but her eye tracked to him. The cargo dock was not a coincidence. I had announced my arrival on this station 3 days before I docked. Someone with access to that information prepared the toxin and positioned the delivery in advance. Rail set down the data slate. You think it was planned specifically for you? The toxin was specific to my genetic line, she said. Not to Drakveth in general. To my clutch. There are perhaps 40 living individuals whose biology would react the way mine did. The weapon was not broad. It was precise. He considered this. Have you told the station security team? No. A pause. I have not decided yet who on this station I trust. Rail thought about breath. About Issen. About the laughter in the corridor. That seems reasonable, he said. She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had a different quality, something older in it, something that had been sitting for a long time. Why were you the one they sent? He knew she had figured it out already. She was 340 years old. She was not asking because she did not know. She was asking because she wanted to hear how he said it. The senior staff invoked resource allocation protocol, he said. I was the remaining medical officer on duty. They gave up. Yes. And then they sent you as a substitute for effort. I think the word they would use is gesture, he said. But yes. She absorbed this. The bay was quiet enough that he could hear the low mechanical hum of the station's ventilation system and the steady beep of her monitors and nothing else. Did you know who I was? She asked. When you walked in. No. I looked you up after you stabilized the first time. And what did you find? He told her plainly. Elder of the Drakveth clutch of Drev Soreth, one of the oldest surviving lineages in the Drakveth collective. Political and cultural authority over a territorial range that covered 11 colony systems. Signatory to 4 of the major cooperative trade agreements. The kind of person whose death would not be a private loss. She listened. And if you had known all of that when you walked in, she said, would it have changed anything? He thought about it honestly, the way he tried to think about everything. No, he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Why not? Because the problem in front of me was a patient who needed help, he said. The rest of it is real, but it is not the problem I was standing in front of. Another silence. This one lasted longer. My death, she said carefully, would have opened a territorial dispute that 3 separate factions have been engineering for approximately 60 years. The cooperative has interests in that territory. Certain individuals within the cooperative have private interests. There are beings on this station who would have benefited from my dying quietly in a back bay with minimal record of what actually happened. Rail looked at her steadily. Are you telling me to watch my back? I am telling you, she said, that you have stumbled into something larger than a medical case, and you deserve to know that. He nodded slowly. Thank you. You are not concerned. I am, he said. I am also looking at your secondary inflammation markers, which have gone up 2 points in the last hour. And that is the more immediate problem. She made a sound. It was low and resonant, and he realized after a moment that it was laughter, real laughter, not a performance of it, the kind that comes out sideways when something genuinely surprises you. It clearly hurt her. She did it anyway. You are a very strange creature, Rail, she said. I have been told, he said, and went back to the markers. The inflammation was manageable. It was her body's natural response to the cellular recovery process. Tissue rebuilding created heat and fluid accumulation and the kind of internal noise that looked alarming on a readout, but was, in this case, a sign that things were working. He adjusted her fluid support, added a low-level anti-inflammatory compound that he had confirmed was safe for Drakveth biochemistry, and noted the change in her chart. They talked through the rest of that day in the way that 2 very different people talk when they are stuck in a room together and there is nothing to do but be honest. She asked him about human medicine, not the technology, but the philosophy. How did humans approach a patient they had never seen before? How did they decide what mattered first? He explained Triov. She found the concept interesting in the way she found many human concepts interesting. Unexpected in its simplicity, more sophisticated underneath than it appeared on the surface. He asked her about Drakveth healing traditions. She described practices that were thousands of years old, built on an understanding of their own biology that had developed long before the cooperative existed. Some of it aligned with what he had read in the reference volumes. Some of it corrected errors in those volumes that had apparently been there for decades. He wrote down everything she told him. At some point in the afternoon station time, not that either of them was tracking it closely, the door opened without a knock. Commander Breath came in. He was alone, which was unusual. He looked at Sarah. He looked at Rail. He looked at the monitors. He took a moment to arrange his expression into something that read as professional concern. "I am glad to see you improving," he said to Sarah. "The cooperative is relieved. We were deeply committed to your care throughout this ordeal. Medic Duras has represented our medical division admirably." Sarah looked at him. Her eye was steady and clear and absolutely unimpressed. "The cooperative invoked resource allocation protocol and left me to die," she said. "Rail Duras is the reason I am alive. Those are the facts as I experience them. I will be documenting them in my formal account when I am able to write." Breath was quiet for a moment. "Of course," he said. "Every perspective is valuable." "It is not a perspective," she said. "It is a record." Another pause. "I will check in again soon," Breath said, and left. The door closed. Rail looked at his data slate. Sarah looked at the ceiling. "He is going to try to manage this," she said. "Yes," Rail agreed. "He will not succeed." "Probably not," Rail agreed again. She made a small sound that was not quite amusement and not quite something else. Something in between. She was quiet for a while after that, resting in the particular careful way of a body that was healing and knew it, conserving energy without quite sleeping. Rail sat on the floor and read through everything Veth had sent him in the hours since their call: additional reference notes, old procedural documents, a personal annotation on cluster recovery timelines that was more useful than anything in the official literature. He read it all. It was going to be a long night. He did not mind. The monitors beeped steadily. Her temperature was holding. Her inflammation markers had started to drop again. She was here. He was going to make sure she stayed that way. The Drakveth ship arrived on the third day. It came in fast, not aggressive, but with the quiet certainty of a vessel that did not expect to be questioned. It was a mid-weight diplomatic transport, the kind that carried people who mattered, and it docked at the station's primary ring rather than the cargo ring, which meant it had filed a formal diplomatic arrival rather than a transit stop. The station's traffic systems logged it automatically. Within the hour, everyone who needed to know knew. Rail found out because Sarah told him. She had felt the docking vibration through the floor. Her body was still attuned to the station's movement in the way of a creature built close to the ground, and she had been quiet for a few minutes after it. And then she had said, "They are here." He had looked up from her latest organ cluster readings. "Who?" "My collective sent a delegation." She paused. "How they knew I was alive, I am not certain. The signal may have gone out when the station logged my improved status. Or someone on this station told them. Either way, they are here." Another pause. "Not all of them will be glad of it." Rail had asked what she meant. She had explained, plainly and without drama, that the three officials most likely to be sent on this kind of mission included two individuals who had spent the last several decades positioning themselves for the succession that her death would have triggered. She named them. She described what they stood to gain. She did it the way she did most things, directly, without sentiment, as a set of facts that he deserved to have. He had listened. He had made a note on his data slate. Then he had gone back to her cluster readings. The official request came 2 hours later. A formal notice that the Drakveth delegation requested an immediate meeting with Elder Sarah in the station council chamber. Commander Breath had already agreed on the station's behalf, the notice said, and medical staff were welcome to attend in a supportive capacity. Rail read that last part twice. Sarah, when she heard it, used a word in Drakveth that he did not know. He asked her what it meant. She told him it was a term roughly equivalent to political cowardice dressed as hospitality. He wrote that down too. She was not well enough to walk. Not comfortably, not safely, not in a way that her body would thank her for. But she was well enough to be moved with assistance, and she made it clear that she would be present at the meeting in her own body rather than watching it through a remote screen. Rail arranged a support frame adapted from heavy cargo equipment, because nothing in the medical bay was rated for her weight, and walked alongside her through the corridors to the council chamber. The corridor cleared ahead of them as they moved. Species stepped back, some out of courtesy, some out of the particular instinct that kicks in when something very large moves toward you, regardless of how slowly it is going. The council chamber was a wide, circular room with seating and tiers around a central floor. The Drakveth delegation stood on the central floor. 3 individuals, one who was introduced as an administrative representative, and 2 who were not introduced by title, but whose posture communicated, in the universal language of beings who believed themselves important, that they expected to be taken seriously. Commander Breath was already there. So were 4 cooperative observers and a recording official. Sarah settled into the center of the floor. Rail stood to her left. He had not been asked to stand there specifically. He had simply stood there, because that was where he could see the monitors attached to her portable support frame, and nobody had told him to move. The meeting began. It was, for the first 20 minutes, a masterclass in saying very little in a great many words. The administrative representative expressed relief at Sarah's survival. He outlined the collective's commitment to investigating the attack. He expressed appreciation for the station's care and attention. He did not mention rail. He did not mention the resource allocation protocol. He spoke of the cooperative's handling of the situation as if it had been smooth and professional from the beginning. Sarah listened. Her face was unreadable to anyone who did not know her. Rail was beginning to know her, a little, and he thought she looked like someone who was waiting. One of the 2 unnamed officials, a pale, sharp-scaled male who had been watching Rail with undisguised curiosity since the meeting began, spoke next. He asked about the transition of care and whether Sarah was prepared to transfer to the collective's medical team for ongoing treatment. He used the phrase appropriate specialist care twice. The implication was clear. The human's involvement was a temporary awkwardness that should now be wrapped up neatly. Sarah said no. The chamber was quiet. I will complete my recovery here, she said, under the care of Rail Duras, who is my attending physician. When I am medically cleared for transit, I will return to collective space. Not before. The pale official began to speak. Sarah spoke over him. I am invoking Dareth Sova, she said. The chamber went very still. Even Breath, who likely did not know the term, seemed to feel the weight of it through the sudden silence of everyone who did. Rail did not know the term either. He kept his face neutral and filed it for later. The administrative representative recovered first. Elder Sarah, he said carefully. The Dareth Sova is an ancient custom. Its application in modern diplomatic. Its application, Sarah said, is precisely what the ancient custom describes. Rail Duras saved my life when the cooperative's medical staff had formally abandoned my case. Under Dareth Sova, he is my keeper of breath. He is owed my protection and support for the duration of his life. That is the law of my people, and it is not negotiable. Rail looked at her. She did not look back at him. Her eye was fixed on the delegation. What does keeper of breath mean? He said quietly. It means, she said, still looking at the delegation, that your safety is my personal obligation. That any threat to you is a threat I am bound to answer. That my resources, my network, and my name stand behind you for as long as I live. A brief pause. I will explain the full details later. You could have mentioned this before the meeting, he said. I could have, she agreed. I wanted to see your face. He kept his face very carefully neutral. The 2 unnamed officials were doing rapid calculations behind their eyes. Rail could see it happening. The political picture they had arrived with a dead elder, a convenient succession, decades of positioning about to pay off had not just been disrupted. It had been turned around and pointed back at them. Sarah was alive. She had a keeper of breath. She was going to write a detailed account of what had happened on this station. And she was looking at them the way someone looks at a problem they intend to solve at their leisure. Commander Breath cleared his throat. The cooperative is very pleased with the outcome of this situation, he said. Medic Duras' work reflects the quality of. The cooperative invoked resource allocation protocol, Sarah said, clearly and without heat, as though she were reciting a fact of geography. The cooperative's senior physician declared me beyond treatment and walked away. Rail Duras was assigned to my case as a formality. He was not expected to succeed. He succeeded anyway. That is the record. I would appreciate it if the record were not dressed in language it does not deserve. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight to it. Breath said nothing. Rail looked at his monitoring unit. Her temperature was holding steady. Her organ cluster output had improved by another 6% since the morning reading. She was doing better. Her readings are stable, he said, to no one in particular. She needs rest in approximately 2 hours. I will need the meeting to be finished by then. Several faces turned toward him with varying degrees of disbelief. He met them all with the same expression. The meeting finished in 40 minutes. On the walk back through the corridor, Sarah moving slowly and carefully on the support frame, she asked him what he was thinking. I am thinking, he said, that I need to understand what I just agreed to. You did not agree to anything, she said. I invoked it on your behalf. You cannot refuse it. That seems like something you should have mentioned earlier. I mentioned it immediately upon invocation. Before the invocation, he said. Mentioning it before would have been more useful. She made the sound again, the low, rumbling laugh that she could not quite suppress when something genuinely caught her. You sound annoyed. I am not annoyed, he said. I am recalibrating. She looked at him with the steady gold eye. Are you truly unhappy with the outcome? He thought about it honestly, as he always did. No, he said. Good, she said, because it is done. They walked the rest of the way in silence. Behind them, in the council chamber, officials began the careful and complicated work of adjusting to a reality that had not gone according to anyone's plan. Ahead of them, Bay 9 waited, small and dim and smelling of fuel and rust, and it felt, to Rail, like somewhere he knew. Somewhere that had become, in the strange way of unexpected places, briefly home. He held the door open for her. She went inside. He followed and got back to work. For weeks after the night he walked into Bay 9, Rail stood in his actual office for the first time in what felt like a different life. It was not much of an office. A desk, a chair, a shelf of physical reference volumes that he preferred to digital copies because the physical ones did not require a charge cycle and did not crash. A small window that looked out at a section of docking ring where cargo shuttles came and went all day. He had been assigned the office when he first came to Varan 7 and had spent approximately 11 total hours in it in the months since. There were files on the desk that he did not remember leaving there. He sat in the chair. He drank something hot. He looked out the window. It was strange, having nothing immediately requiring his attention. It did not last long. Sarah's recovery had taken 3 weeks of gradual improvement, of daily monitoring, of her organ clusters slowly rebuilding function towards something that Veth, in his daily check-in comms, described as better than I expected from the procedure you described. She had spent the first 2 weeks in Bay 9 and the 3rd week in a proper medical room that Breath had arranged with the particular enthusiasm of someone trying to overwrite a poor first impression. She did not comment on the improved room. She did not thank Breath for it. She ate the food that Rail's dietary specifications required and rested when he told her to rest, and argued with him about everything else, which he had come to understand was simply how she engaged with the world. They had settled into a rhythm during those weeks. A shared meal period each station day, him eating whatever the commissary had that was edible, her working through quantities of food that required a standing order with 3 separate suppliers. They talked, not always about medical things, about history, about how different species understood the passage of time, about what it meant to have a duty to something larger than yourself without losing the ability to see the individual in front of you. She had 340 years of things to say. He had 36 years of questions. The balance worked. The investigation into her poisoning had moved forward without him. The Cooperative Security Division had taken the evidence Sarah had provided in her formal account and begun following the threads. 2 of those threads led back to individuals within cooperative administrative ranks. One of them, it turned out, had been present on the station at the time of the attack. The political disruption from this finding was still reverberating through the cooperative's upper chambers 4 weeks later and showed no signs of settling. Rail followed the reports when they crossed his desk, noted them, and filed them. He had been summoned to a commendation hearing in the 2nd week. He had attended. A formal panel of cooperative officials had presented him with a certificate acknowledging his work on the Sarah case, described his efforts as exemplary dedication to the cooperative's medical standards, and asked whether he had any remarks. He had said, "Can I go back to my actual duties now?" The panel had not been sure how to respond. He had taken their silence as a yes and left. Issen found him on a Tuesday afternoon, in the corridor outside the commissary. He did not apologize. Rail had not expected him to. Thurvani social customs did not have a direct equivalent to apology, which was a philosophical position on responsibility that Rail found interesting even as it occasionally frustrated him. Instead, Issen asked a technical question. He asked it carefully, in the manner of someone who had spent time thinking about how to ask it without what it implied being too obvious. He wanted to know the metabolic flush procedure, the specific compound ratios, the delivery method, the timing. He wanted to know, Rail understood, how to do what Rail had done. He answered in full. He walked Issen through every step, every calculation, every improvisation, and why he had made it. He answered the follow-up questions. He sent Isin the relevant reference files. When Isin thanked him and walked away, Rael watched him go and thought that this was, possibly, how things actually changed, not in council chambers, not in formal proceedings, but in a corridor outside the commissary, one practitioner asking another how they had done something they had not thought possible. On the day Sara was cleared for travel, the station was busy. It was always busy. Stations of this size rarely had a quiet moment, but that particular day had a cargo dispute at the primary dock and a diplomatic delegation from the Vorkai home system and 3 separate maintenance alerts in the lower ring, which meant that most of the station's attention was pulled in other directions. The departure dock, where Sara's ship was berthed, was quieter than usual. That suited both of them. They stood at the dock entrance. Her ship's crew were completing their final checks inside. She was dressed, as far as Drakveth dressed for anything, in the formal arrangement that indicated readiness for travel, a particular way of holding the body. Certain markings she had applied that morning that she had explained were traditional, but not decorative. She looked like herself, fully herself, which was different from how she had looked when he first saw her. He had not realized how diminished she had seemed until he saw her at full presence again. He had her medical records on a sealed data chip in his pocket, ready to transfer to her ship's systems. He had written a detailed recovery guide for her ship's physician. He had written out a list of warning signs that would require immediate attention and a list of signs that were normal recovery fluctuations and could be monitored without alarm. He had done all of this because he could not go with her, and because doing it was the only way he could think of to extend the care past the point where he could physically provide it. She looked at him in the quiet of the dock. "I have lived 340 years, she said. In that time I have seen a great many things that I would have told you in advance were impossible." He waited. "I would not have told you this was impossible," she said. "I would have told you it was unlikely. I would have given you very poor odds." "I do not think much about odds," he said. "I know," she said. "That is the thing about you that I could not understand at first." He looked at her. "And now, she said, "I think it is perhaps the most important thing about your species. Not that you are strong, not that you are clever, but that you do not begin from the assumption that the situation is settled. You walk into the room and you look at what is in front of you and you ask what can be done, not what has been decided." She paused. "Most species, when they are told something cannot be done, believe it. Most species have a lot of evidence for that," he said. "Yes," she agreed. "And you have a great deal of evidence that they are wrong, and you collect it every time, and you do not seem to find it surprising." She tilted her head. "I find it extraordinary." "You could just say I am stubborn," he said. "I could," she said. "I chose not to." He handed her the data chip. She took it, which required more delicacy than it looked. Her hands were not built for objects this small, but she managed with the careful precision of someone who had spent 3 centuries learning how to interact with a world scaled for smaller species. "I told you," she said, "that you should think carefully about what to ask for. As keeper of breath, you have a legitimate claim on my support, my resources, my network." She looked at him steadily. "What do you want?" He had thought about this. He had thought about it in the quiet hours between monitoring checks, in the early mornings when the station was as close to silent as it ever got, in the back of his mind while he talked to Veth and read Veth's notes, and realized how much there was that he did not know about the species he was supposed to be able to treat. "Drakveth Medical Archives," he said. "The full records. Everything your healers have documented on your own biology, your own treatments, your own procedures. Whatever is not classified above the level you can authorize." She looked at him for a long moment. "You could have asked for anything," she said. "I know," he said. "I want the archives. To treat the next one," she said. "Not a question. To treat whoever is in front of me," he said. "Whatever species, whatever condition. I never want to walk into a room and not have the information I need because nobody thought to write it down somewhere I could reach." He paused. "I want to know more than I know. That is always what I want." She was still for a moment. The dock was quiet around them. Somewhere behind her, one of her crew called out a readiness signal in Drakveth, and she answered it with a short sound without looking away from Rael. "I will send you every record we have," she said, "and I will contact the physicians of 3 other species I have relationship with and ask them to do the same. It will take time to arrange, but it will come." He nodded. "Thank you." She looked at him in the particular way she had looked at him several times over the past weeks, as if she were seeing something she was still deciding how to categorize. Something that did not fit neatly into the existing frameworks. "Thank you, Rael," she said, "for not walking out of that room." He did not know exactly what to say to that, so he said nothing, which sometimes worked better. She turned and boarded her ship. He watched it until it cleared the dock and the outer hull closed behind it. Then he stood in the quiet for a moment longer. Then he walked back through the station. There was a new case on his comm unit. It had come in while he was standing at the dock of Vorkai Trader in the lower ring with a respiratory complaint that had not resolved after 2 days, and 2 notes in the medical log saying the primary care station had seen him and recommended monitoring, and 1 note from the trader himself saying the monitoring was not helping. Rael read the file as he walked. He did not know Vorkai respiratory anatomy as well as he wanted to. He made a note to remedy this and simultaneously identified the 3 reference sources most likely to be useful in the short term and queued them for reading while he walked to the lower ring. Bay 7 was closer than Bay 9. Cleaner, too. Better lighting. He pushed the door open. The trader looked up at him, compound eyes wide, breathing shallow, visibly uncomfortable. The expression of a person who had been told to wait and had been waiting too long. "Medic Duras?" the trader said. "Yes," Rael said. He pulled on his gloves. He opened his kit bag. "Tell me what happened." And he got to work.